As the plane's engines hummed in preparation for takeoff, the usual bustle of passengers settling in filled the cabin. Among them was Michael Grant, a sharp-dressed black man in his early 40s, who had just taken his seat in first class. Michael wasn't new to this. Years of hard work as a business consultant meant he'd become accustomed to the perks of premium travel. For him, it was a rare moment to relax, enjoy a little luxury, and maybe even catch up on some much-needed rest. But today would be anything but relaxing. Michael had barely adjusted his seatbelt when a flight attendant approached. Her name tag read Claire, and she carried herself with the brisk efficiency of someone who had worked the job for years. At first glance, Claire seemed polite, professional even. But as her eyes landed on Michael, something shifted. "Sir," she began with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, "I believe you may be in the wrong seat. Coach is further back." Michael blinked, unsure if he'd heard her correctly. He reached for his boarding pass, his voice calm and measured. "No, this is my seat. 2A. Claire hesitated, glancing down at the pass he held out. Her expression didn't soften. "I'll have to double-check," she said curtly before walking off, leaving Michael with a knot of confusion and growing discomfort in his chest. The other first-class passengers began to notice. Whispers floated through the cabin. Some shot Michael curious glances. Others quickly looked away, pretending not to see. Michael shifted in his seat, feeling the weight of their stares. This wasn't the first time he'd been made to feel out of place, but he had hoped things like this were becoming a relic of the past. Claire returned a moment later, this time with another flight attendant in tow. Her voice was louder now, more pointed. "Sir, I'm going to ask you again, are you sure this is your seat?" Michael's frustration bubbled to the surface, but he kept his composure. "As I said, I'm in 2A. If there's an issue, I'd appreciate it if you could resolve it without making a scene." The tension in the air was palpable. Claire glanced at the other passengers, as if seeking validation. "We'll see about that," she said sharply before disappearing again, leaving Michael to sit in awkward silence. Minutes stretched on, each one feeling heavier than the last. Then, just as Michael was beginning to wonder if he should ask to speak to the captain, Claire returned with the captain himself. "Sir," the captain said, his tone more measured than Claire's but no less serious, "there seems to be some confusion. Can we take another look at your boarding pass?" Michael handed it over, resisting the urge to sigh in exasperation. The captain studied it, his brows furrowing slightly before he turned to Claire. "This is correct. Mr. Grant is seated in 2A. Claire's face reddened. "Oh, I see." But it wasn't over. The way Claire's voice faltered, the way she refused to meet Michael's eyes, it was clear this wasn't just a mistake. Michael felt the sting of something far deeper than a mere misunderstanding. And as the plane finally began its taxi down the runway, one question loomed over him. Was this really about a boarding pass, or something much bigger? What happened next would shock everyone on that flight, and the internet too. As the plane climbed steadily into the sky, Michael leaned back in his seat, his thoughts a whirlwind of frustration and disbelief. He had faced subtle prejudice before, the kind that lingered in uncomfortable glances or unspoken assumptions. But today's encounter with Claire felt different. The way she had approached him, the insistence on questioning his place in first class, it wasn't just about a boarding pass. There was an edge to her demeanor, something unspoken yet unmistakable. Michael glanced around, taking in the reactions of the other passengers. A woman in her 60s, seated across the aisle, quickly averted her gaze when their eyes met. The man behind him, who had been engrossed in his tablet earlier, now seemed overly interested in the back of Michael's seat. Each glance, each whisper, added to the knot forming in his chest. He pulled out his phone, the screen lighting up with missed messages from his wife Danielle. Her last text read, "Safe travels, babe. Call me when you land. Love you." A small smile tugged at the corners of his lips, but it faded quickly. He thought about calling her to vent, but decided against it. She didn't need to worry about this. Not yet. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing the cruising altitude and the flight's duration. Michael barely registered the words, his mind drifting to his reasons for being on this plane in the first place. He was heading to Atlanta for a high-stakes business pitch, one that could secure his firm a multi-million-dollar contract. Years of hard work had led to this moment, countless late nights and sacrifices. Sitting in first class wasn't just a luxury, it was a symbol of everything he'd earned. And yet, one moment with Claire had managed to undermine it all. The flight attendants began their rounds, offering drinks and snacks to the first-class passengers. Michael noticed that Claire avoided his row entirely, delegating his section to another attendant, a younger woman with a nervous smile who seemed determined to make up for her colleague's behavior. "Would you like something to drink, sir?" she asked, her voice polite but tinged with unease. "Just water, thank you," Michael replied, offering her a small smile to ease the tension. She nodded and hurried away, leaving Michael to stew in his thoughts. As he sipped his water, his mind wandered back to Claire. He wondered if her behavior was rooted in some personal bias, or if she was simply having a bad day. He hated jumping to conclusions, but the look in her eyes when she first approached him, the judgment, the dismissal, was hard to ignore. It wasn't just her actions. It was the unspoken message behind them. Michael's thoughts were interrupted when a voice whispered from the seat next to him. "Excuse me, sir," said the man in 2B, a middle-aged traveler in a crisp suit. He leaned slightly toward Michael, lowering his voice. "I couldn't help but notice what happened earlier. That was uncomfortable, to say the least." Michael turned to him, studying his expression. The man seemed sincere, his tone laced with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Yeah," Michael replied carefully. "It wasn't exactly how I imagined starting this flight." The man nodded, glancing toward the galley where Claire was stationed. "I've flown this airline for years, and I've never seen anything like that. It's not right. You handled it well, though." "Thanks," Michael said, though the words felt hollow. Handling it well wasn't the point. He shouldn't have had to handle it at all. The man hesitated, as if debating whether to say more. Finally, he extended his hand. "By the way, I'm Tom Radcliffe." Michael shook his hand. "Michael Grant." "Well, Michael," Tom said, leaning back into the seat. "If it's any consolation, I think you've got a lot of people on your side here. I saw the way some of the others were looking at her. She's got some explaining to do." Michael appreciated the sentiment, but it didn't ease the tightness in his chest. He nodded politely and turned back to the window, watching the clouds drift by as the sun began to set. The rest of the flight passed uneventfully, though the tension lingered. Every time Claire walked by, Michael felt her presence like a shadow. She never met his eyes, her movements stiff and rehearsed. It was as if she hoped that ignoring him would erase the earlier confrontation. But Michael couldn't ignore it. Not when the memory of her words played on a loop in his mind. As the plane began its descent, the captain announced that they'd be landing shortly. Michael felt a sense of relief, eager to leave the confined space and the discomfort behind. But as the wheels touched down and the passengers began gathering their belongings, an unexpected twist added another layer to the tension. A voice came over the intercom, this time from Claire herself. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to remind you to check around your seat for any personal belongings before exiting the aircraft. And on behalf of our crew, thank you for flying with us." Her voice was calm, professional, and devoid of any hint of the earlier incident. To anyone listening, she sounded like a model flight attendant. But to Michael, her words felt hollow, almost mocking. As he stood to retrieve his carry-on, he caught sight of Claire at the front of the cabin. She was speaking to another passenger, her demeanor warm and friendly, a stark contrast to how she treated him. Michael's jaw tightened. Part of him wanted to confront her, to demand an explanation. But another part of him knew that this wasn't the time or place. Tom, the man from 2B, gave him a sympathetic pat on the shoulder as they disembarked. "Good luck, Michael. Don't let this ruin your trip." Michael forced a smile. "Thanks, Tom. You too." As he stepped into the terminal, the cool air conditioning was a welcome change from the stifling tension of the plane. But the relief was short-lived. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and when he checked the screen, his heart sank. A notification from social media had popped up. Someone had posted a video taken during the flight, the moment Claire had confronted him. The caption read, "Flight attendant accuses black man of being in the wrong seat. Watch what happens next." Michael stared at the screen, his stomach sinking. The video was already gaining traction, comments flooding in faster than he could read them. Some were supportive, condemning Claire's behavior. Others, predictably, were less kind, questioning his motives or accusing him of overreacting. As he scrolled through the comments, a mix of emotions washed over him: anger, frustration, and a deep sense of exhaustion. He hadn't asked for this. He didn't want to become a viral sensation or the face of yet another story about racial bias. All he had wanted was a peaceful flight. But it seemed the story wasn't over yet. Michael stood frozen in the terminal, staring at his phone. The video's comment section was a battlefield of opinions, and the views were climbing by the second. He wanted to look away, to ignore it, but curiosity and frustration rooted him in place. Each comment pulled him further into the storm. Typical, always making it about race. She's clearly in the wrong. Can't believe this still happens. Where's the full context? Maybe he did something to provoke her. The mixture of support and skepticism hit harder than Michael expected. He wasn't a stranger to online discourse, but being the center of it felt like standing under a magnifying glass. Every detail, every nuance of that brief encounter with Claire was now being dissected by strangers around the world. And the worst part, they only had a fragment of the story. Michael snapped his phone shut and exhaled sharply. He needed to refocus. The business pitch was tomorrow, and he couldn't afford to lose his edge. But as he moved toward baggage claim, the weight of the incident clung to him like a shadow. His mind raced with questions. Who had filmed the video? Why had they chosen to post it? And, perhaps most unsettling, how would this impact his life beyond the confines of the airport? As he collected his suitcase, a voice called out behind him. "Hey, Michael." He turned to see Tom, the fellow first-class passenger, walking briskly toward him. There was an urgency in his stride, as though he had something important to say. "Tom," Michael greeted, trying to muster a smile. "Didn't expect to see you again." "Yeah, me neither," Tom said, glancing around. "But I saw that video. Someone sent it to me already. It's blowing up." Michael's heart sank. He hadn't considered how quick news traveled these days. "I just saw it too," he admitted. "I don't even know what to think." Tom nodded, his expression serious. "Listen, I don't know who posted it, but this could get big. And not just for you, for the airline too. People love a good scandal." Michael frowned. "That's the last thing I wanted. I didn't even know anyone was recording." Tom hesitated, then leaned in closer. "Look, if this thing keeps gaining traction, you might want to get ahead of it. Share your side of the story before it spirals out of control." Michael appreciated the advice, but the thought of putting himself out there even more felt overwhelming. He thanked Tom anyway and watched as he disappeared into the crowd. Once outside the terminal, Michael hailed a cab and gave the address of his hotel. As the car weaved through the city, he stared out the window, his thoughts a blur. The hum of the tires on the asphalt was almost soothing, but his mind refused to rest. What should have been a straightforward trip had turned into something much larger, and he wasn't sure how to navigate it. By the time he reached the hotel, his phone had buzzed at least a dozen more times. Friends, family, and colleagues had all seen the video, and their messages ranged from supportive to concerned. "Are you okay? Call me." "Saw the video. What happened?" "Stay strong, man. People are with you." Michael dropped his suitcase on the floor of his room and sunk onto the edge of the bed. He wanted to respond, to explain everything, but he didn't even know where to start. Instead, he opened his laptop, determined to distract himself with work. But as soon as he logged in, an email notification popped up. It was from the airline. The subject line read, "Regarding incident on flight 742. Michael's pulse quickened as he clicked on it. The email was formal, apologizing for any inconvenience experienced during the flight, and assuring him that they were conducting a thorough review of the situation. There was no mention of Claire, no acknowledgement of the video. It was a carefully crafted message designed to placate without admitting fault. Frustration bubbled in Michael's chest. The airline's response felt like a brush off, an attempt to control the narrative without addressing the real issue. He closed the laptop and rubbed his temples, trying to push down the rising anger. Meanwhile, across the city, another scene was unfolding. Claire sat in her small apartment, her phone buzzing incessantly. She had seen the video too, and the backlash was immediate. Messages flooded her inbox, ranging from supportive coworkers to complete strangers hurling insults. She felt a mix of panic and defensiveness. "This isn't fair," she muttered, pacing the room. She replayed the moment in her head, trying to convince herself that she hadn't done anything wrong. But the comments online told a different story. People were calling her racist, unprofessional, and worse. Her manager had already called, demanding an explanation. The airline was under pressure to act quickly, and Claire knew her job was on the line. She tried to tell herself that this would blow over, that people would forget in a few days, but deep down she wasn't so sure. As the night wore on, both Michael and Claire found themselves trapped in the same storm, though on opposite sides. Neither could sleep, their minds consumed by what had happened and what might come next. The video had ignited a fire, and its flames were spreading fast. For Michael, the question was whether to step into the spotlight and confront the issue head-on or to let the video speak for itself. For Claire, the question was how to defend herself against accusations that felt both exaggerated and painfully real. And for everyone else watching, the question was simple: whose side are you on?